Hey, what's up fellow designers? Today we got a super exciting Figma video. So recently they dropped a bunch of awesome updates, and one of the standout feature is the game-changing auto layout improvements. So in this video we're diving deep into all the new updates of auto layout. And hey, if you're new here, consider hitting that subscribe button because we're all about making your design journey smoother. So now let's move on to Figma. This is a card that has auto layout applied, and before we used to have two auto layouts orientations, vertical and horizontal. So if you look at this example, if I start to shrink the card, the text will start to collapse. But look at the tags. They stay out of the canvas and don't adapt with our layout, and we don't want that. So that's because we didn't have the possibility of wrapping content. And right now we have this new option to wrap content. So in this case I've created this layout using the new wrap feature, and if I start to shrink or expand the content of your design, it will adapt. So for example, if you define a minimum width in the rectangle and then try to shrink it beats that minimum, it will not shrink more and the content will wrap to another line below. This is what we usually call breakpoints. When you get to this breakpoint and you cannot shrink or expand anymore, so in order to have this condition on wrap, you need to set the minimum and maximum width, and you can also do the same for height, and then you can have something like this. But we will get into it. So let's start to create a new project. But before we dive into design, are you aware of what is auto layout? If not, I will quickly explain you. But if you already know, go to the timestamps and move to the next chapter so that you don't lose any time. So basically, auto layout is a property you can add to frames and components. It lets you create designs that grow to fill or shrink to fit and reflow as their content changes. This is great when you need to add new layers, accommodate longer text strings, or maintain alignment as your designs evolve. For example, I will quickly draw two rectangles here, side by side, and then select both and hit Shift A to transform them into auto layout. Now as you can see here in the layers panel on the left side with this icon, it means that they have now auto layout applied. And the big difference with auto layout, it's like that they now belong to a main component or a main frame that has restrictions, and you can set these restrictions for sizes, margins, paddings, responsiveness, and so on. Okay, so now we're going to click in the wrap icon here, and now I can start to shrink here, and you may notice that the object of my frame goes to the next line and it follows the spacing that we have here in the panel, so it adapts to all components inside this auto layout, and if you adjust it will apply everywhere. So let's adjust to 24 and there you go, and you can set this also horizontally and vertically. So this is auto layout in a nutshell. Looks easy peasy, right? So for the sake of this video, let's build up our layout with multiple cards that we saw in the beginning. Let's delete these rectangles and create the frame that will be our starting point. Something around 420 pixels by 360 pixels. Let's add a rectangle inside of our frame that will be our image, and to quickly add an image inside of it we can use the plugin and splash. So you can go to plugins and select Unsplash, and let's search for an image of a robot to add into our card. You can search for portrait or landscape formats. For this case, let's look for landscape format. I think this one is nice, so let's add it. So now we have our image inside the frame, and now let me add some text. For example, explosive growth in AI, and make it bold, and set the font size to 24, for example. Now let's add some text paragraph, and for that we can also use a plugin. So go to plugins and call content reel that has some text presets, and after run it you can select here in the tab text and select lorem ipsum, which is basically random text that you can copy a portion of it like this and paste it into the design. Cool, now we have our text here, right? Looks simple. Now let's adjust the text, so let's make the font size to 14, regular style, and line height to 20 for example. And also let's make our card with right round corners. So let's put an 8 into the main frame. Okay, so now it's time to add the tags. Draw a rectangle here and activate the stroke also. Then type news and select both layers and hit Shift A to apply auto layout. If you look closely to the layers panel, you may see that the component changed and we can rename our layer to tag news. Now here on the right hand side, let's quickly set the paddings because we will add 2 more tags. So the horizontal padding set to 12 and vertical padding to 2. And let's make this rounded, so type here on top 4 in the corner radius. And we've just created a tag that has auto layout, and next we will duplicate it and we will only need to change the text and the background will adapt. So now just one more thing, I want to change the color. So here in the fill I will click in the color square that will open the colors and I will drag the slide to some greenish or bluish. And here we go. And also let's add some strokes, so click here in this drop tool to pick the sample from our tag and make it a little bit darker. Okay, pretty cool. So now we can duplicate the tag, so change the name to artificial intelligence, and we can then duplicate 2 more times and name the tags to technology and robot. And there you go, we have our card now. So let's just rename the layers. So here is our card, which is our main component, and then the tags. So now what happens if I try to shrink or expand it? Absolutely nothing, right? Why? Because it's not already in auto layout, and also because I didn't apply any restrictions to each element inside of this frame. Right now I only created the frame and placed objects inside of it. So let's start defining that rules now. First, let's group the text layers, so shift click on the title and paragraph to select both and then apply the auto layout with Shift A. And if you look carefully to the right hand side panel, you see the orientation is vertical because both objects are on top of each other. So you can set the spacing between text. For example, let's type 8 here and it's okay for now. Let's do the same for tags. Select all and then Shift A to apply auto layout. And here you can see that the orientation icon selected is horizontal because the tags are side by side horizontally. And we can now select the 2 objects, and let's say we want the gap between them to be 16. So now that we defined some aspects inside of this auto layout, we can start by renaming it to text block and tags, for example. And inside of it, you can see the layers. To transform this component to be responsive, make it wider or shorter, we need to go to the right panel and set the restrictions. For example, here in the horizontal resizing, and select fill container, which means that the object will fill all the available space in the component horizontally. So if you look carefully to our title, Figma is already showing the marks, and you can notice that this blue line is set to hug content, which means that it's hugging the words we have written on the content. So if we set to fill container, you may see now that the line occupies the full width of the component, in this case the text block. And we will do the same to the paragraph. So here in the right, click in the horizontal width and select fill container. Now on this paragraph you can see that expanded outside of our main frame. So we need to define what is the limit of our layout, So for now it will be fixed, and you can see that while I select and move it to inside of the frame, you see here it changed to fixed. So I will let it like that, because now we will define the relation between the text and image, and then from the image to auto layout. So it's like we are planning this auto layout from inside to outside. At least for me, doing like this looks easier, but there isn't an exactly order for that, but for me it makes more sense to do it like that. So okay, now to create a relation between those two objects, I can select the top layer that we named as card, which is the frame itself that contains the image and the text block, and go to the right hand side panel and click here in the plus icon in front of auto layout. And you can see now that it transforms our frame into auto layout using vertical orientation with the image on top and text down below. And if I click and drag here in the points, you can see already something happen. So the first thing I want is that my image, when I am expanding horizontally, the image also expands. So what will happen is that the robot will increase, you will see it. So let's select the image, and you can see that in the size restrictions, the width size is set to fixed. That's why when I expanded the frame, nothing happened and the image was centered. And then you ask, but why the image was centered? If you select our auto layout in the top layer, that is our card, and if you take a closer look at this map, you can see that the objects are aligned on top and centered. So if I click in some of these points, you see that the alignment changes. Looks cool, right? And for now, I am also not defining the exact size of my card, because we are editing first the restrictions of the objects inside our card. Remember that I've said that I like to work from inside to outside. So let's define the spacing of the text block. So change the width to fill container, and we can now adjust also the padding. Let's say for example 12 and 12. Also in the tags, let's make them fill container with 12 for paddings. Now the same for the image. I want the image to fully occupy the card if I expand it. So again in the width change to fill container, and you can now check everything inside the card to see if they are all filled container. So let's check it out. Okay, let's try this out and expand to see what happens. Look how cool the content is adapting to the card, and the same for collapsing. Automatically it's resizing, and this is the first step. So if we continue to shrink the image, we lost readability. There are parts of the text not appearing, and the component it's not working like that, so we need to define a minimum width to avoid this. So the ideal is to find a nice size. For example, this looks nice, and you see here on the right that we have 230 pixels, and this looks good. So I can set it as our minimum size width. So we can click here and set the minimum size width to 230. Now let's expand it to find what could be the maximum size width. At this point, looks too much. So let's go back a little bit, and this looks nice at 320. So let's set the maximum size width to 320. Okay, so now if we try to expand or collapse more than the restrictions that we applied, nothing will happen, because now the card will not have less than 230 and more than 320 width, so we almost have our component responsive. We done some work with width, but we can also set some restrictions to height. So when I shrink the image and the text start to cut out and go to the next line, the card will increase the space, so we have always visibility on it. And the same when we expand the card. And for this case, we want to select the card, and then in the size restrictions, let's apply a content to height because we want our content to adapt and hug the component while we are doing these adaptations of the card. And if you look carefully, if we shrink now, as the paragraph adds one more line, the rest of the card follows the text with a spacing of 12 points and it adjusts smoothly. So we just need one more thing to make happen for the text. And this will be quickly. Just select the icon wrap and select here the gap to 8. And if we try to shrink now, they will go directly down below. And this is already an hint for what's coming next. Okay, now let's create the responsive layout that you saw in the beginning, because we have already our card. And if you get to this point, I will kindly ask you to like the video and subscribe the channel. Thank you. Okay, moving on, let's select the card and duplicate it. You can use Command D and with both cards select and hit Shift A to apply auto layout. So basically, we will create a condition between those two cards that will place them inside a carousel. And the first thing we are going to do is set the spacing between them. By default, when applying auto layout, Figma identifies the original space between card and sets it as default. And this applies for all sides. So if you come up here to auto layout, you see that the orientation is horizontal. That automatically identifies because they were already side by side. But if I click to align vertical, it will apply the same spacing here. And what we will explore is this one, the wrap tool. We are almost there. And here we have gap between cards, so let's make it 24. Okay, the condition is created, so let's rename our carousel and let's add more cards to this. So Command D and add 2 more. We have now 4 cards and we can change the image also. So I will open again the plugin Unsplash and I will search more robots to switch between my cards. So I will type robot in the search and set the orientation to landscape and let's pick some. Okay, this looks nice, and what do we have now? If you go to layers, we have our cards and we have our carousel. And we have already specified the minimum and maximum width of each card. And now what happens if I try to reduce here the layout? Nothing, because each component has already on its minimum width. And the same for the maximum width. So first, the things we need to do is to select all cards, and here in the resizing, let's change to fill container. Right now we are only working in the width. And now if we expand, you may notice the cards expanding, but also then it appears this red line. That means we reach the maximum width of the card. And the same if we do the opposite. If I shrink to the left, they will become smaller until one point and then red line again. So that was a restriction that we applied before. Okay, this is start to look responsive, but what can we do to readjust all and fill all the spaces? So now we need to set the breakpoints, and we can start by cleaning out the max width. So select all cards, and here in max width, let's click and delete it. Then we will define the wrap in our auto layout. So nothing happens when you click on it, but if you click and move left to shrink, you will see the card going to the line below. It will break the design and display in 2 rows. Pretty cool, right? So what happened is that you can see that the card didn't have space in the first row and was moved to the second one. But since we deleted the max width, the card adapted to fill all the row. And now we can set restrictions on it to improve this block with breakpoints. To improve this grid, you can drag left and start to reduce the size of the layout. Right now we have 3 columns on top and 1 at the bottom, but this image here is too expanded and I want it to look better. So what we can do is to duplicate this one, and now we have 3 cards on top and 2 down below, so 5 components in our layout. And we need to define a maximum size width to avoid that this happens. So here in the width, let's try out and reduce the values, and here at this value 992 you can see that goes to 4 on top and 1 below, and I don't want this, but here at 990 it looks good, so I will set the maximum size width to 990. So this is the maximum that my layout can expand to avoid that and keep a good visual. So if I try to expand now, it will lock at this moment. And now we set the restrictions for minimum width. So if I move, you see it will start to break. 2 columns, 1 column, and for example in this point, we can set the minimum size, 320. So let's go to width, select minimum size width and set to 320. So as you can see, we have now our components adjusting to each other. And you can apply this for horizontal also and combine them into multiple layouts in more complex designs. And now the last touch. In our main component, we can set the background to this color. And add some padding around it with 20 pixels, and let's make it rounded also, so let's put here 20. And regarding sizing, let's set the minimum width to 320, and to set up the height, let's set the minimum height to 825 and max height to 2250. And now we can test the breakpoints again and look at this. So cool. And that's it. This was a quick view in the new auto layout, and you have minimum and maximum width, height and the wrap function to create responsive objects. So I hope you enjoyed this video. You liked the video, don't forget to subscribe and leave your comment down below in case you want to have more questions to talk. Thank you and have a great day.